just commit fraud. You weaponized intimacy. You used your position as a husband to destroy the woman who trusted you most.
He said I was never enough.
You preyed on vulnerable women who were simply seeking connection and companionship. Why should you receive mercy when you gave none? I hereby sentence you, Andrew, to life in prison with no parole.
On the evening of September 29, 2021, in the sleepy retirement community of Brookhaven, Florida, Sarah Richardson sat at her kitchen table, her hands trembling as she scrolled through a series of romantic emails on her laptop. The messages were from a man named Prince Adeyemi Olatunde, a dignified African royal who had entered her life 6 months earlier through a senior friendship forum. His words were poetic, attentive, filled with the kind of care and interest Sarah hadn't felt in years. "My dearest Sarah," one email read, "your kindness radiates through every message. In my country we say that a woman of your grace is a gift from the ancestors. I feel blessed to know you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she read. After losing her younger sister Patricia to cancer in February, the loneliness had been crushing. Her marriage to Andrew, once the foundation of her life, had grown cold and distant. He was always working on some project, always on his phone, always somewhere else even when he was in the same room. Prince Adeyemi's messages had become her refuge, her secret source of joy in a life that felt increasingly empty. What Sarah didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have imagined, was that Prince Adeyemi Olatunde didn't exist. There was no African royal. There was no dignified gentleman on the other side of the world thinking of her. The man writing those messages, crafting that elaborate fiction, manipulating her emotions and slowly draining her bank account, was sitting in the next room watching television. It was Andrew, her husband of 38 years. The man she'd trusted with her life, her heart, and every penny she'd ever saved. Before we continue with this devastating story of betrayal and survival, if you're interested in cases where the people closest to us turn out to be strangers, please hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. Your engagement helps us share these important stories. Now let's go back to that September evening when Sarah's entire world was about to shatter. Sarah had met Andrew Richardson in 1983, when she was 22 and working as a receptionist at a dental office in Tampa. He was 27, charming, well-dressed, and working his way up at a financial consulting firm. He'd come in for a teeth cleaning and asked her out before he left. Their first date was at a seafood restaurant overlooking the bay, and Andrew had been attentive, funny, asking her questions about her life and actually listening to the answers. They married 10 months later in a small ceremony at a Methodist church, with Sarah's parents and sister in attendance and Andrew's small family, just his mother and an uncle, on his side. Andrew's father had passed away when he was young, he'd explained, and he'd been mostly raised by his mother who worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat. "I'm going to build a good life for us," Andrew had promised on their wedding night. "You'll never have to worry about anything." For a while it seemed he'd keep that promise. Andrew climbed the ranks at the consulting firm, eventually becoming a senior advisor. They bought a modest house in a Tampa suburb. Sarah stopped working when their daughter Emily was born in 1985, and then again when their son Michael arrived in 1988. She threw herself into motherhood, into creating a warm home, into supporting Andrew's career. But there were cracks even then, though Sarah didn't want to see them. Andrew worked long hours, often not coming home until after the children were in bed. There were unexplained charges on credit cards, dinners at restaurants Sarah had never been to, hotel rooms for business trips, that seemed excessive. When she asked about them, Andrew would get defensive. "Do you know how hard I work for this family?" he'd snap. "I'm out there every day making sure we have everything we need and you're questioning receipts? Do you want me to bring home a smaller paycheck? Is that what you want?" Sarah would apologize, feeling guilty for doubting him. He was providing for them after all. She had a beautiful home, healthy children, a comfortable life. Who was she to complain about a few unexplained expenses? The pattern continued for years. Andrew's career flourished, but his presence at home diminished. He missed Emily's school plays, Michael's baseball games, family dinners. He was always working, always networking, always chasing the next deal. Sarah raised the children essentially alone, telling herself this was normal, that this was what partnership looked like in modern marriage. When Emily graduated high school in 2003, Sarah found text messages on Andrew's phone from a woman named Jessica. The messages were explicit, clearly part of an ongoing affair. When Sarah confronted him, Andrew didn't deny it. "It didn't mean anything," he said flatly. "It was just stress relief. You've let yourself go, Sarah. You're always tired, always focused on the kids. What did you expect?" The words cut deeper than the affair itself. Sarah looked at herself in the mirror that night and saw a 42-year-old woman who had dedicated 2 decades to raising children and maintaining a home. She had gained weight. She had stopped wearing makeup every day. She had become comfortable. She had become not enough. Andrew promised to end the affair, to go to counseling, to try harder. They went to 3 therapy sessions before Andrew declared it a waste of time and money. "We just need to move forward," he said. "Stop dwelling on the past." So Sarah tried to move forward. She started exercising, lost weight, bought new clothes. She tried to be more interested in Andrew's work, more available for his needs. But the distance between them only grew. He seemed to tolerate her presence more than enjoy it. When Michael left for college in 2006, Sarah found herself alone in a house with a man who felt like a stranger. She suggested they travel, reconnect, rediscover what had brought them together. Andrew said they couldn't afford it, that he was dealing with some complicated financial situations at work. In 2009, the financial consulting firm Andrew had worked at for over 20 years let him go. The official reason was restructuring, but Sarah learned later through a casual comment from one of Andrew's former colleagues that there had been complaints about his conduct with female clients, about inappropriate relationships that crossed professional boundaries. Andrew was 54 and suddenly without the career that had defined him. He fell into a depression, spending days on the couch, barely speaking. Sarah tried to be supportive, but he pushed her away. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he'd say. "You've never had to be the provider." He eventually found consulting work, freelancing for smaller firms, but the money wasn't as good. They had to downsize from their house to a smaller condo. Their retirement savings took a hit. Andrew became more withdrawn, more irritable. The children were grown and busy with their own lives. Emily had married and moved to North Carolina, starting a family of her own. Michael was building a career in software engineering in Seattle. They called on holidays, visited occasionally, but Sarah felt their absence keenly. She tried to fill her days with activities, book clubs, volunteering at the local library, taking painting classes. But coming home each evening to Andrew's cold silence, to the feeling that she was an unwelcome presence in her own home, was slowly crushing her spirit. In 2019, at Andrew's insistence, they made another move, this time to Brookhaven, a retirement community in Central Florida. "It's cheaper," Andrew explained. "And my mother is getting older. She's only an hour away. We should be closer." Andrew's mother Diane was 87 and in assisted living. Andrew visited her once a month, never inviting Sarah along. "She prefers to see me alone," he'd say. The house in Brookhaven was small but pleasant, a 2-bedroom ranch with a screened-in porch and a small yard. Their golden retriever Max, now 12 years old, seemed to enjoy the space. Sarah tried to make it feel like home, but something about Brookhaven felt isolating. Most of their neighbors were older retirees who kept to themselves. There were few community activities. Sarah felt adrift. And then in February 2021, Sarah's sister Patricia died. Patricia had been Sarah's closest friend, her confidant, the one person who truly understood her. They talked every week, visited each other several times a year. Patricia had been battling breast cancer for 3 years, and when it metastasized to her bones and liver, the end came quickly. Sarah flew to Atlanta for the funeral, sitting beside Patricia's 2 adult sons, feeling like a piece of her own identity had been carved away. Andrew didn't come to the funeral. "I can't get away right now," he'd said. "Work is too busy." Patricia would understand. But Patricia wouldn't have understood. She'd never liked Andrew, had told Sarah more than once that he was selfish, that Sarah deserved better. Sarah had defended him for years, but sitting at her sister's funeral without her husband beside her, she couldn't help but think Patricia had been right. She returned to Brookhaven feeling more alone than ever. Andrew barely acknowledged her grief. When she tried to talk about Patricia, about the memories and the loss, he'd change the subject or leave the room. "People die, Sarah," he said once. "It's part of life. You need to move on." But Sarah couldn't move on. The loneliness was suffocating. She stopped painting, stopped volunteering. She spent her days walking Max through the neighborhood, sitting on the porch with a book she couldn't focus on, going through the motions of life without feeling truly alive. It was in this state, grieving, lonely, desperate for connection, that Sarah discovered the Senior Connections Forum online in late March 2021. The forum was designed for older adults to meet friends, share experiences, discuss everything from recipes to health concerns to travel dreams. Sarah created a profile under the username SunshineReader60 and began tentatively posting in discussion threads. The responses were kind, welcoming. People shared stories about their own losses, their own struggles with loneliness and retirement. Sarah felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. She began checking the forum every day, contributing more, forming connections with other users. In early April, she received a private message from a user named Prince Adeyemi_Lagos. Dear Sunshine Reader 60, I noticed your thoughtful comment on the thread about coping with loss. I too have experienced the pain of losing a loved one. My dear wife passed 5 years ago. I wanted to reach out to say that your words brought comfort to my heart. If you ever wish to chat with a friend who understands, I am here. With warm regards, Adeyemi. Sarah was touched by the message. She looked at Prince Adeyemi_Lagos's profile. His photo showed a distinguished-looking black man in his 60s, wearing traditional African attire, standing in front of what appeared to be a grand building. His bio said he was a retired royal advisor from Lagos, Nigeria, widowed, with 3 grown children. She wrote back, thanking him for his kindness. He responded within hours, and soon they were exchanging messages daily. Prince Adeyemi was everything Andrew wasn't. He asked about her day, remembered details she'd mentioned in previous messages, expressed genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings. He wrote eloquently about his life in Lagos, about Nigerian culture, about his work helping local schools and orphanages. In my culture, he wrote, we believe that elders hold the wisdom of generations. A woman like you who has raised children and maintained a home and survived loss, is royalty in her own right. Sarah found herself living for these messages. She'd wake up excited to check if he'd written, would rush through her daily tasks so she could spend time composing thoughtful responses. For the first time in years, she felt valuable, interesting, desired. After a month of messaging through the forum, Prince Adeyemi suggested they move to email for more privacy. He gave her an email address, prince.adeyemi.olatunde@globalmail.com. Sarah created a new email account specifically for their correspondence, something she could check without worrying about Andrew seeing. Not that Andrew would notice anyway. He spent most of his time in his home office with the door closed, supposedly working on consulting projects. He barely spoke to Sarah except to ask what was for dinner or to complain about something. The house was too cold, too warm, too quiet, too noisy. Through email, Sarah's relationship with Prince Adeyemi deepened. He sent her photos of Lagos, vibrant markets, beautiful beaches, architectural wonders. He told her stories about his late wife, about the pain of widowhood, about the challenge of moving forward after loss. Sometimes I think we are alike, you and I, he wrote. We are people who love deeply, who give everything to those we care for. And when that love is not returned with the same depth, it leaves a wound that never quite heals. Sarah read those words and cried. He understood. In a way no one else did, Prince Adeyemi understood the specific ache of loving someone who couldn't love you back the way you needed. In June, Prince Adeyemi mentioned that he was facing a financial challenge. His charitable work had expanded, and he was trying to help a group of orphans pay for school fees, but there had been a delay in accessing some of his funds due to Nigerian banking regulations. I apologize for mentioning this, he wrote. It is not your burden to bear. But I have come to trust you as a dear friend, and sometimes it helps simply to share one's troubles. Sarah asked how much he needed. Prince Adeyemi was reluctant to say, insisting he didn't want to impose. But eventually he admitted that $5,000 would cover the school fees and give the children a chance at education. Sarah didn't have that kind of money readily available. Their savings were modest, and Andrew controlled most of their finances. But she had a small inheritance from her mother who had passed away in 2015, about $15,000 that she'd kept in a separate account, money that was solely hers. She wanted to help. Prince Adeyemi had given her so much: companionship, understanding, a reason to feel valued. Helping these children would be meaningful, would be using her mother's legacy for something good. She transferred $5,000 to the bank account Prince Adeyemi provided, a complicated routing through an international transfer service. He was effusively grateful, promising to send photos of the children once the fees were paid. 2 weeks later, he contacted her with another crisis. His mother had fallen ill and needed medical treatment that wasn't covered by Nigerian healthcare. He was devastated, worried he might lose her. Sarah sent $3,000. In August, Prince Adeyemi mentioned that he was planning to visit the United States in the fall. He had always wanted to see Florida, and more than that, he wanted to meet Sarah in person after months of such meaningful connection. I have feelings for you that go beyond friendship, he wrote. I know it may seem strange given that we have never met face to face, but the heart knows what it knows. You have brought light back into my life. If it's not too bold to say, I believe I am falling in love with you. Sarah's heart raced as she read the words. She was 60 years old, in a dead marriage, and someone was falling in love with her. Someone kind, interesting, attentive. Someone who made her feel alive. She wrote back carefully, admitting that she had feelings for him too, but that the situation was complicated. She was still married even if that marriage was hollow. "I understand," Prince Adeyemi replied. "I would never ask you to do anything that compromised your values. But perhaps we could meet as friends and see what the future might hold. Sometimes the universe brings people together for a reason." The thought of meeting him filled Sarah with a mixture of excitement and terror. What would Andrew say? Would he even care? She decided not to tell him, not yet. Maybe once she met Prince Adeyemi in person, she could figure out what to do about her marriage. But then, in early September, Prince Adeyemi encountered yet another financial obstacle. The trip to the United States was expensive, and some of his assets were tied up in a property dispute in Lagos. He needed help with the plane ticket and initial expenses, another $4,000. By now, Sarah's inheritance was almost depleted. She had less than $3,000 left. She sent it all, convincing herself that once Prince Adeyemi arrived, everything would make sense. They would figure out the future together. But the visit kept getting postponed. First there was a delay in processing his visa. Then there were complications with the property dispute. Then his mother's health worsened again. And Sarah began to feel a gnawing doubt. She'd sent $12,000 to a man she'd never met in person, never spoken to on the phone or video chat. Prince Adeyemi always had an excuse for why video calls weren't possible. Poor internet connectivity, his phone camera was broken, he was self-conscious about his appearance since his wife died. In the back of her mind, Sarah knew she'd been foolish. She knew the warning signs of an online scam. She'd seen the news stories, the warnings. But she'd been so lonely, so desperate for connection, that she'd ignored her own instincts. And then came September 29, 2021. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table in the late afternoon, scrolling through her email correspondence with Prince Adeyemi, trying to decide whether to send him more money for yet another crisis. This time something about customs fees for a package he was sending her. She heard Andrew moving around in his office, talking on the phone in the low, careful tone he used for work calls. She went to get herself a glass of water, and as she passed Andrew's office, she noticed his tablet sitting on the hallway table, charging. Andrew usually kept his devices locked down tight, never leaving them unattended. But the screen was on, and Sarah could see it was open to an email application. Curiosity made her pause. Andrew had been so secretive lately, so guarded. What was he hiding? She picked up the tablet, telling herself she'd just close whatever was open. But then she saw the email address in the inbox, prince.adeyemi.olatunde@globalmail.com. Her heart stopped. She looked closer. The inbox was full of messages. Messages from the Senior Connections Forum, messages from multiple women, messages with subject lines like, "Payment received," and "Transaction complete." With shaking hands, Sarah opened one of the emails. It was from a woman named Margaret, thanking Prince Adeyemi for his friendship and confirming that she'd sent $2,000 to help with his charitable work. Sarah felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. She opened another email. This one was from a woman named Dorothy, expressing her love for Prince Adeyemi and asking when they would finally meet in person. There were dozens of emails. Dozens of women. And every single one of them was being scammed by Prince Adeyemi, an identity that didn't exist, that had been created and maintained by Andrew Richardson, Sarah's husband of 38 years. Sarah's hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the tablet. Her mind raced, trying to process what she was seeing. Andrew had created this entire persona. He had been the one writing those beautiful messages. He had been manipulating her, emotionally and financially, while sitting 15 feet away in the next room. But why? Why would he do this to her? To all these women? She opened the sent folder and started reading messages Andrew had sent as Prince Adeyemi. To her. The romantic words she'd cherished, the understanding she'd felt so grateful for, all of it had come from Andrew. One email in particular made her stomach turn. "My dear Sarah, your trust means everything to me. I know you've been hurt before, that your husband doesn't appreciate the treasure you are. But I see you. I value you. When we finally meet, I will show you what it means to be truly loved." Andrew had written those words. Andrew, who barely looked at her anymore, who treated her like an inconvenience in his own home, had pretended to be someone else to make her feel loved, and to steal what little money she had left. Sarah heard Andrew's office door open. He was walking toward the hallway, still talking on his phone. She quickly set down the tablet exactly where it had been and rushed to the kitchen. her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. Andrew appeared in the kitchen doorway, ending his call. He looked at her with the usual mild irritation he seemed to feel whenever he saw her. "What's for dinner?" he asked. Sarah stared at him, this man she'd spent 38 years with, this stranger who had just revealed himself to be someone she never knew at all. "Sarah? Dinner?" She found her voice, though it came out shaky. I haven't thought about it yet." "Of course you haven't." He sighed, that familiar long-suffering sigh that made her feel small. "I'll just order something. God knows I can't count on you for anything anymore." He walked back to his office. Sarah stood in the kitchen, her whole body trembling. She needed to think. She needed to process what she'd discovered. But she also needed to know more. She needed to understand the full scope of what Andrew had done. She waited until she heard him on another phone call, then quietly returned to the hallway. The tablet was still there, still unlocked. She picked it up and took it to the bedroom, closing the door. For the next hour, Sarah went through everything. She found the folder where Andrew had saved templates for messages to different women, carefully crafted paragraphs he could mix and match to create the illusion of personal communication. She found spreadsheets tracking which women had sent money and how much. The total was staggering, over $200,000 from at least 15 different women over the past 2 years. She found photos he'd downloaded from the internet and used as Prince Adeyemi, stock photos of an African businessman, images stolen from legitimate websites. She found drafts of messages Andrew had written but not sent yet, including some to her. "My dearest Sarah, I'm afraid I have difficult news. My mother has passed away and I need help with funeral expenses. I hate to ask, but you're the only person I can turn to." He had been planning to extract even more money from her, to keep the scam going indefinitely. But the most chilling thing Sarah found was a folder labeled Backup Plan. Inside were documents, life insurance policies, retirement account information, and a draft of what appeared to be a suicide note. Written in Sarah's voice. "I can't go on anymore. The loneliness is too much. Patricia is gone. My children are far away. I have nothing left to live for. Please forgive me. Mom." Sarah's hands went numb. She read the note again, her mind refusing to accept what it implied. Andrew had been planning something. Something far worse than financial fraud. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Andrew was coming toward the bedroom. Sarah quickly closed all the files and set the tablet down, but she wasn't fast enough. Andrew opened the bedroom door and saw her standing there with his device. For a moment they just stared at each other. Then Andrew's expression changed. The mild irritation was replaced by something harder, colder. "What are you doing with that?" His voice was quiet, controlled. "I know," Sarah whispered. "I know what you've been doing. Prince Adeyemi, that's you. You've been scamming me. Scamming all those women." Andrew didn't deny it. He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. "You weren't supposed to see that. How could you?" Sarah's voice broke. "How could you do that to me? I'm your wife. Those were my mother's savings. That was all I had left." "All you had left?" Andrew laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Sarah, you've never had anything. Everything we've had came from me. Your mother's pathetic $15,000? That was nothing. I've been carrying this family for 40 years. Carrying us? You've been stealing from me? From all those women. I've been supplementing our income because my consulting work dried up and we're barely scraping by on my Social Security. You think this house pays for itself? You think your credit cards, your food, your comfortable little life just happens? I had to do something. So you created a fake identity and scammed vulnerable women? That's your solution. Vulnerable? Andrew's voice was rising now. You were all practically begging for it. Lonely old women desperate for attention, willing to hand over money to any man who paid you a compliment. Do you know how pathetic that is? Do you know how pathetic you are? The words hit Sarah like physical blows. I was lonely because of you. Because you've been cold and distant and cruel for years. I needed someone to talk to, someone who cared. And you were stupid enough to think that someone actually existed? That some African prince wanted anything to do with a 60-year-old nobody from Florida? Andrew took a step closer to her. You were always gullible, Sarah. Always naive. It's one of the things I hated most about you. You said you loved me. On our wedding day you promised. I promised a lot of things. People say what they need to say to get what they want. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. What did you want? Why did you marry me if you hated me so much? I didn't hate you then. You were pretty enough, young enough, compliant enough. But you aged poorly. You got soft. You stopped being interesting. And honestly, Sarah, you were never that interesting to begin with. Then why didn't you just leave? Why stay married to someone you despise? Because divorce is expensive. Because it's easier to maintain the status quo. Because, he stopped, seeming to catch himself. Because what? Sarah pressed. Andrew's expression changed again, became calculating. You really want to know? Because I've been waiting. Waiting for what? For you to become worth more dead than alive. The words hung in the air between them. Sarah felt ice flood through her veins. What does that mean? It means I doubled your life insurance policy 6 months ago. It means that sad little suicide note you found? That wasn't hypothetical. It was a plan. Sarah couldn't breathe. You were going to kill me. I was going to help you along. You've been so depressed since your sister died, so isolated and miserable. Everyone would believe you finally just gave up. I'd be the grieving husband. I'd collect the insurance money. I'd finally be free of you. Oh my God. Sarah backed away from him, her legs hitting the edge of the bed. You're insane. You're actually insane. I'm practical. Do you know what it's like being married to you? Like dragging around dead weight. You contribute nothing. You're just there, taking up space, using resources, being needy and pathetic. The only valuable thing about you is that insurance policy. I'm calling the police. Sarah moved toward her phone on the nightstand. Andrew was faster. He grabbed her wrist hard enough to make her cry out. No, he said. You're not. Let go of me. You think you can ruin this for me? After I've planned everything so carefully? You think I'm going to let you call the police and destroy my life? Your life? What about mine? Your life is worthless, Sarah. It always has been. You were never enough. Not as a wife, not as a mother, not as a woman. You were never enough for anyone, least of all me. The words, those specific words, broke something in Sarah. All the years of criticism, of being made to feel inadequate, of believing she was the problem in their marriage, crystallized in that moment into clarity. Andrew didn't just not love her. He hated her. And maybe always hated her. And now he wanted her dead. I'm leaving, she said, trying to pull her wrist free from his grip. I'm going to the police and I'm telling them everything. No, Andrew said again. His other hand closed around her throat. You're not. Sarah couldn't scream. She clawed at his hands, trying to break his grip, but Andrew was bigger and stronger. He slammed her backward and her head hit the wall with a sickening crack. Pain exploded through her skull. It would have been easier if you'd just taken those pills I'd been planning to give you, Andrew said, his voice eerily calm as his hands tightened around her throat. Cleaner. More believable. But this works too. A tragic fall. An accident. You hit your head. It happens to people your age all the time. Black spots danced in Sarah's vision. She couldn't breathe. She tried to knee him, to fight back, but her body wasn't responding properly. She was going to die. After everything, Andrew was going to kill her in their bedroom and no one would ever know the truth. And then she heard barking. Max, their 12-year-old golden retriever, had been sleeping in the living room. But he'd heard the commotion, heard Sarah's distress, and he came running. The bedroom door burst open. Sarah had forgotten to latch it completely, and 80 pounds of protective dog launched himself at Andrew. Max's teeth sank into Andrew's arm. Andrew screamed and released Sarah's throat, trying to fight off the dog. Sarah fell to the floor, gasping for air, her vision swimming. Get off me. Get off. Andrew was yelling, trying to kick Max away. But Max held on, growling and shaking his head, his instinct to protect his person overriding everything else. Sarah knew this was her only chance. She scrambled to her feet, her head spinning, and ran. Out of the bedroom, down the hallway toward the front door. Behind her, she heard Andrew shout, Sarah, stop. She didn't stop. She threw open the front door and ran barefoot onto the driveway into the street, toward the nearest house with lights on. It was the Hendersons' house, 3 doors down. Sarah had met them briefly when she'd moved to Brookhaven but didn't know them well. She ran up their front steps and pounded on the door, sobbing. Please, please help me. He's trying to kill me. The door opened. Tom Henderson, a retired veteran in his 70s, took one look at Sarah, bleeding from where her head had hit the wall, bruises already forming on her throat, and pulled her inside. Linda, he shouted to his wife. Call 911. Now. Linda Henderson appeared, took one look at Sarah, and immediately grabbed her phone. Sarah collapsed onto their couch, shaking uncontrollably. He was going to kill me. My husband. He's been scamming me, scamming other women. He said, her voice broke. He said I was never enough. That I'd be worth more dead. It's okay, Tom said, his voice firm and calm in the way of someone who dealt with crises before. You're safe now. The police are coming. Through the Hendersons' front window, Sarah could see her house. Andrew was standing in the doorway looking up and down the street. Then he saw them watching from the Henderson house. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance. Then Andrew turned and went back inside, closing the door. Within minutes, sirens filled the quiet Brookhaven streets. 2 police cars and an ambulance arrived. Officers approached Sarah's house while EMTs came to the Henderson residence to treat Sarah. One of the EMTs, a young woman named Jessica, cleaned the cut on Sarah's head and examined the bruising on her throat. "Ma'am, these injuries are consistent with strangulation," she said gently. "You need to go to the hospital for a full evaluation. Head injuries can be serious." Sarah nodded, numb. She watched through the window as police officers knocked on her door, waited, then forced it open. They emerged a few minutes later with Andrew in handcuffs. He looked calm, composed, like he was simply dealing with an inconvenient misunderstanding. He said something to the officers. Sarah couldn't hear what, and they nodded, putting him in the back of the police car. A detective approached the Henderson house. He introduced himself as Detective Marcus Williams, Brookhaven PD. "Mrs. Richardson, I need to ask you some questions about what happened tonight. Are you up for that, or would you prefer to wait until after you've been examined at the hospital?" "I can talk now," Sarah said. Her voice was hoarse, her throat raw. "I need to tell you everything before I forget. Before I lose my nerve." Detective Williams sat down across from her, pulling out a notebook. "Take your time. Start wherever you're comfortable." Sarah told him everything. The loneliness after Patricia's death. The Senior Connections Forum. Prince Adeyemi and the months of correspondence. The money she'd sent. Finding Andrew's tablet and discovering the truth. The fake suicide note. Andrew's confession that he'd been planning to kill her for the insurance money. The attack. Detective Williams listened, making notes, his expression growing increasingly grim. "Mrs. Richardson, do you still have access to the tablet where you found this information?" "No. It's back at the house. But I can show you the email address, the forum, everything. We'll need all of that. And we'll need to get a warrant for your husband's electronic devices. What you're describing is fraud, attempted murder, possibly conspiracy if he was planning this for a while." He paused. "I need to ask, is there anyone who can corroborate any of this? Anyone your husband might have told about the scam or the insurance plan?" "I don't know. Andrew doesn't have many close friends. He's always been private, secretive. But there must be records, bank transfers, emails to the other women, the insurance policy changes. We'll look into all of it. For now, you need to get medical attention. After that, we'll get a formal statement from you." "And Mrs. Richardson?" Detective Williams looked at her with something like admiration. "You did the right thing running. That took courage." "It wasn't courage," Sarah said quietly. "It was terror." At the hospital, doctors confirmed that Sarah had a concussion from hitting her head on the wall. The bruising on her throat was severe but would heal. They wanted to keep her overnight for observation. Sarah called her daughter Emily from the hospital room. "Mom? What's wrong?" "It's almost 10 o'clock. Sarah's voice broke as she said, "Honey, something's happened. I'm okay, I'm safe, but I need to tell you about your father." She explained everything, or as much as she could get through without completely breaking down. Emily listened in shocked silence. "I'm getting on the first flight out tomorrow," Emily said when Sarah finished. "Mom, I can't believe, I always knew Dad was distant, but this is sociopathic. I should have seen it. I should have known." "How could you have known? He fooled everyone. He's been fooling us for decades." Emily's voice was fierce. "You survived, Mom. You got away from him. That's what matters now. I don't know what happens next. I don't have any money. You took everything. The house is in both our names. I don't. We'll figure it out. Michael and I will help. You're not alone in this. You were never alone, even if it felt that way." After Sarah hung up, she lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through 38 years of marriage, seeing everything differently now. Every cold comment, every criticism, every time Andrew had made her feel worthless, it had all been deliberate. He'd been systematically destroying her self-worth, isolating her, making her believe she was the problem. And it had almost worked. She'd almost believed she deserved it, that she really was never enough. The investigation into Andrew Richardson moved quickly once it started. Detective Williams obtained warrants for Andrew's computer, tablet, phone, and all of his financial records. What they found was even worse than Sarah had described. Andrew had been running the Prince Adeyemi scam for 3 years, not 2. He'd targeted women specifically in their 50s and 60s, women who were widowed or divorced, who were active in online forums for seniors. He'd created multiple personas, not just Prince Adeyemi, but also a retired military officer named James Connor, a widowed doctor named Robert Chin, even a lonely farmer named Bill Watson. He'd scammed over 40 women out of a combined total of nearly $450,000. Some women had lost their entire life savings. One woman had taken out a second mortgage on her home to send money to Dr. Chin for his supposed missionary work. Another had emptied her retirement account to help Colonel Connor cover medical bills for a sick grandchild who didn't exist. The fraud unit brought in FBI agents since the scam had crossed state lines. They began the painstaking work of tracking down all of Andrew's victims, gathering evidence, building the case. But the attempted murder charge was what District Attorney Linda Morrison focused on most intently. We have Sarah's testimony, the physical evidence of the assault, the fake suicide note, and the life insurance policy he'd recently doubled, Day Morrison told Detective Williams. But I want more. I want to prove premeditation beyond any doubt. If Andrew Richardson had succeeded in killing his wife, he'd have gotten away with it. Everyone would have believed she committed suicide. We need to show the jury exactly how calculated this was. They found more evidence in Andrew's files. Internet searches for how to stage a suicide, and drugs that cause heart attacks, going back 8 months. Drafts of messages to Sarah as Prince Adeyemi designed to deepen her depression and isolation. Even a journal where Andrew had written about his plans. S is becoming more withdrawn, more dependent on the fake prince persona. Good. The more isolated she feels, the more believable the suicide will be. Need to increase insurance policy soon. The monthly premium is higher but worth it for the payout. 6 more months of this and I can move forward with final plan. Just need patience. Reading those words, Detective Williams felt physically ill. Andrew Richardson had been systematically destroying his wife's mental health to make her murder look like suicide. It was one of the most cold-blooded schemes he'd encountered in 20 years of police work. Andrew, meanwhile, remained in custody. His bail was set at $500,000, an amount he couldn't pay since investigators had frozen his accounts as part of the fraud investigation. His lawyer, a public defender named Frank Morrison, no relation to the DA, tried to argue that Andrew should be released on his own recognizance, that he was a 65-year-old man with no prior criminal record and deep ties to the community. Judge Patricia Alvarez was unmoved. Mr. Richardson is charged with attempted murder, multiple counts of fraud, and conspiracy. He poses a clear danger to the victim and potentially to other victims we haven't yet identified. Bail is denied. Mr. Richardson will remain in custody until trial. Andrew showed no emotion when the judge's ruling came down. He simply nodded as if he'd expected it. Sarah, watching via video link from the hospital, felt a wave of relief. Andrew was locked up. He couldn't hurt her anymore. But then came the hard part, rebuilding a life that Andrew had systematically destroyed. Emily arrived from North Carolina the next day, her husband and 2 young children with her. Michael flew in from Seattle the day after that. Sarah's children surrounded her, offering love and support she hadn't fully felt in years. "Mom, why didn't you tell us how bad things had gotten with Dad?" Michael asked as they sat in Sarah's hospital room. "I was ashamed," Sarah admitted. "I thought if I was a better wife, if I tried harder, things would improve. And I didn't want you two to have to choose sides or feel burdened by our problems." "We should have seen it," Emily said, tears in her eyes. "I look back at holidays, at visits, and I remember how Dad would make these cutting remarks to you. How he'd dismiss everything you said. How he treated you like you were invisible. I should have said something." "He was careful," Sarah said. "He never crossed the line into obvious abuse when you were around. It was all subtle, gradual. Death by 1,000 cuts." They helped Sarah leave the hospital and drove her to Emily's hotel. She couldn't go back to the house, couldn't bear to be in that space where Andrew had tried to kill her. Over the next weeks, Sarah had to navigate an overwhelming bureaucratic maze. Restraining orders, divorce proceedings, meetings with prosecutors, sessions with a therapist who specialized in domestic abuse and trauma. The therapist, Dr. Rebecca Torres, helped Sarah understand what she'd been through. "What your husband did is called coercive control," Dr. Torres explained. "It's a pattern of behavior designed to make you feel powerless, worthless, completely dependent on your abuser. He isolated you from support systems, controlled the finances, gradually destroyed your self-esteem. The online scam was another layer of control. He was literally manipulating your emotions while pretending to be someone else. It's one of the most psychologically cruel things I've encountered. Was I stupid? Sarah asked. Everyone must think I'm so stupid. Falling for an obvious scam, staying with a man who treated me so badly. You weren't stupid. You were traumatized. When you're in an abusive relationship, your normal instincts get warped. You start to believe the abuse is normal, that you deserve it. And your husband specifically targeted your vulnerabilities, your loneliness, your grief over your sister, your low self-worth that he'd spent years creating. He knew exactly what he was doing. He told me I was never enough. Right before he attacked me. He was trying to destroy you even in that moment. But Sarah, the fact that you survived, that you got away, that you're here telling your story, that's proof that you are enough. You were always enough. He just couldn't see your worth because he has no capacity for empathy or genuine connection. The trial was scheduled for April 2022, 7 months after the attack. During that time, Sarah had to rebuild every aspect of her life. The house in Brookhaven sold quickly. Sarah wanted nothing to do with it, and she needed the money from her half to start over. Andrew's half would be tied up in legal proceedings for years. Sarah's inheritance was gone, stolen by Andrew. But Emily and Michael set up a legal fund to help her with expenses, and Sarah eventually found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood near Emily's home in North Carolina. Emily insisted she move closer, and for once Sarah didn't argue. She got a part-time job at a library, something she'd always wanted to do but had never pursued. The work was simple, peaceful, surrounded by books and quiet. She attended a support group for domestic abuse survivors and heard stories that mirrored her own. Women who'd spent decades with men who systematically destroyed them. Women who'd blamed themselves, who believed they deserved the treatment they received. Women who'd finally escaped and were slowly, painfully rebuilding their sense of self. And she reconnected with old friends she'd lost touch with over the years. Women Andrew had subtly discouraged her from seeing, women she drifted away from without realizing how deliberate that drift had been. One of those friends was Diane Porter, someone Sarah had known in Tampa before the move to Brookhaven. When Diane learned what had happened, she drove 3 hours to see Sarah. I always hated Andrew, Diane said bluntly as they sat in Sarah's small apartment drinking tea. I know I'm not supposed to speak ill, but I hated him. The way he talked to you like you were a servant instead of his partner. I tried to tell you once, remember? About 10 years ago. I said I was worried about you. Sarah did remember. And she remembered how she'd defended Andrew, how she'd pulled away from Diane after that conversation, convinced that Diane just didn't understand their relationship. I'm sorry, Sarah said. I'm sorry I didn't listen. Don't apologize. Yet you convinced you were the problem. That's what abusers do. Diane reached across and squeezed Sarah's hand. But you got out. And now you get to figure out who you are without him defining you. That was the hardest part, Sarah found. After 38 years of being told she wasn't enough, of molding herself to try to meet Andrew's impossible standards, she didn't know who she was anymore. Dr. Torres gave her homework assignments. Simple things like, make a list of things you enjoy, and do one thing each day just because it makes you happy. Sarah discovered she loved gardening. She bought plants for her small balcony and spent hours tending them, watching them grow. She discovered she was good at watercolor painting. She took a class at the community center and found she had a natural talent for capturing light and shadow. She made new friends. She laughed. She went days without thinking about Andrew. And she prepared to face him in court. The trial of Andrew Richardson began on April 11, 2022. The courthouse in Brookhaven was packed with media, curious onlookers, and several of Andrew's other victims who wanted to see justice served. Andrew entered the courtroom looking older than his 66 years. He'd lost weight in jail, his face gaunt, his hair completely gray. He wore a suit his lawyer had brought, but it hung loose on his frame. He didn't look at Sarah as he took his seat at the defense table. Sarah sat with Emily and Michael on either side of her, their presence a comfort and a reminder that she wasn't alone anymore. District Attorney Linda Morrison delivered the opening statement with controlled fury. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about betrayal on a scale that's hard to fathom. Andrew Richardson married Sarah when she was 22 years old. She trusted him with her life, her future, her heart. And for 38 years he systematically destroyed her. He isolated her. He belittled her. He made her believe she was worthless. And when that wasn't enough, when he decided she was more valuable to him dead than alive, he planned to murder her and make it look like suicide. He created an elaborate online scam specifically targeting his own wife, draining her savings while pretending to be the loving friend she desperately needed. And when she discovered the truth, he tried to strangle her to death in their own bedroom. Sarah Richardson survived only because of her quick thinking and the intervention of the family dog. We will prove beyond any doubt that Andrew Richardson is a con artist, an abuser, and an attempted murderer who deserves to spend the rest of his life in prison. The defense attorney, Frank Morrison, tried a different approach in his opening. Andrew Richardson is not the monster the prosecution wants you to believe he is. He's a 66-year-old man who made some terrible decisions when he was facing financial ruin. Yes, he created fake online identities. Yes, he scammed women, including his wife, out of money. Those are serious crimes and he will be held accountable for them. But attempted murder? The prosecution wants you to believe that a moment of anger, a heated argument that got out of hand, equals premeditated attempted murder. Andrew Richardson never intended to kill his wife. He lost his temper during a confrontation. That's assault, not attempted murder. Don't let the prosecution's emotional narrative cloud your judgment. Look at the facts and you'll see that while Andrew Richardson is guilty of fraud, he's not a would-be murderer. The trial proceeded over 3 intense weeks. The prosecution called victim after victim, women Andrew had scammed. They testified about the loneliness he'd exploited, the money they'd lost, the psychological damage they'd suffered when they learned the truth. Margaret Dwyer, 72, testified that she'd sent Colonel James Connor $83,000 over 18 months. He told me his grandson had leukemia and needed experimental treatment, she said, her voice shaking. He sent me photos of a little boy in a hospital bed. I later learned the photos were stolen from a legitimate fundraising site for a real sick child. Everything was a lie. I lost my retirement savings. I can't afford my medication now. I had to move in with my daughter. Dorothy Chin, 68, testified that Dr. Robert Chin had convinced her to take out a second mortgage on her home. He said he was building a clinic in Cambodia to help poor children, she explained. He sent me architectural drawings, photos of land he'd supposedly purchased. All fake. All lies. I'm going to lose my home because I can't make the mortgage payments. The pattern was the same in every case. Andrew had identified vulnerable, lonely women, established emotional connections, created elaborate stories that played on their compassion, and systematically drained them financially. The FBI forensic accountant testified that Andrew had stolen approximately $473,000 from 42 women over 3 years. Detective Williams testified about finding the evidence on Andrew's devices, the spreadsheets tracking victims, the template messages, the stolen photos. The IT expert testified about the metadata showing when and where messages were sent. Many had been sent from Andrew's home computer while Sarah was in the next room, unaware her husband was posing as her online companion. Dr. Amanda Foster, a psychologist, testified as an expert witness about coercive control and financial abuse. What Mr. Richardson did goes beyond simple fraud, she explained. He specifically targeted his wife, someone he had power over, someone he'd already isolated and psychologically damaged. The Prince Adeyemi persona wasn't just about stealing money, it was about maintaining control, about making sure Sarah stayed emotionally dependent and too confused to question where their money was actually going. But the most damaging testimony came from Andrew himself, or rather from the journal entries prosecutors read aloud. June 3, 2021. S sent another $5K to the Prince persona today. She's completely hooked. Sometimes I'm amazed at how gullible she is. 37 years of marriage and she doesn't even recognize my writing style. August 12, 2021. Increased S's life insurance policy to $500K. Had to forge her signature on the application, but that was easy enough. The monthly premium is steep but worth it for the payout. Just need to wait a few more months so it doesn't look suspicious. September 15, 2021. Been researching methods. Pills are cleanest but need to be sure they can't be traced. Staging a fall might be easier. S is clumsy enough that no one would question it. The hard part will be making sure I'm not home when it happens. Need to establish an alibi. When D.A. Morrison read those entries in court, several jurors visibly reacted. One woman put her hand over her mouth. A man shook his head in disgust. Then came the testimony about the night of the attack. EMT Jessica Warren testified about Sarah's injuries, the head wound, the severe bruising on her throat consistent with strangulation. Tom Henderson testified about Sarah showing up at his door, terrified and bleeding. She kept saying he tried to kill me, Henderson recalled. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. I've been in combat. I know what real fear looks like. That woman was in fear for her life. Detective Williams testified about finding the fake suicide note on Andrew's computer. And then Sarah took the stand. She'd been dreading this moment for months. The thought of sitting in the same room as Andrew, of telling strangers the most painful details of her marriage, made her physically ill. But Dr. Torres had worked with her, helped her prepare. "You're not the same woman he almost killed," Dr. Torres had said. "You're stronger now. You have your voice back. Use it." So Sarah took the stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Dame Morrison began gently. "Mrs. Richardson, I know this is difficult. Take your time. Can you tell the jury about your marriage to Andrew Richardson?" Sarah took a breath. "I married Andrew when I was 22. I thought he was everything I wanted, successful, confident, strong. I thought we'd build a life together." "And did you?" "No. I built a life around him. There's a difference." Sarah's voice grew steadier. "Andrew made all the decisions. Where we lived, how money was spent, what I was allowed to do. I thought that was normal. I thought that's what marriage was supposed to be. When did things start to change? I don't think they changed. I think they were always this way, but I didn't see it. Or I didn't want to see it. Andrew was never emotionally available. He was critical of everything I did. He had affairs. But I blamed myself. I thought if I was better, thinner, smarter, more interesting, he'd love me the way I loved him. What happened after your sister Patricia died?" Sarah's voice cracked. "I fell apart. Patricia was my best friend. And Andrew didn't care. He told me to get over it, that people die and I needed to move on. I was so lonely. That's when I found the Senior Connections Forum." "And that's where you met Prince Adeyemi?" "Yes. Or I thought I did." Sarah looked directly at Andrew for the first time. He stared back, his expression blank. He was kind. Attentive. He made me feel valued. I know now that's called love bombing, overwhelming someone with affection to manipulate them. But at the time, I just thought someone finally saw me." "You sent Prince Adeyemi money?" "Yes. $12,000 over several months. It was my inheritance from my mother. All the money I had that was truly mine. And he took it." Her voice hardened. "Andrew took it while pretending to be someone who cared about me." Dame Morrison walked Sarah through discovering the truth, finding the tablet, reading the emails to other women. "What went through your mind when you realized Prince Adeyemi was actually your husband?" "I couldn't process it at first. It seemed impossible. But then it all made sense. Why the prince always had an excuse not to video chat, why he knew so much about my life, why the messages sometimes used phrases Andrew used. I'd been married to him for 38 years. Part of me recognized his voice even when he was pretending to be someone else." "And then you confronted him?" Sarah nodded. "He was in his office. I waited until he came out and asked about dinner like it was just a normal evening. And I said, 'I know what you've been doing.'" "What was his reaction?" "He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He laughed." Sarah's hands clenched. "He told me I was gullible and pathetic. He said I'd always been boring and disappointing. He said," she paused, gathering herself. "He said I was never enough." "Mrs. Richardson, can you tell the jury what happened next?" "I told him I was going to the police. And that's when he attacked me. He grabbed my wrist first, then his hands were around my throat. He slammed my head against the wall. I tried to fight back, but he's bigger and stronger. He was squeezing my throat so tight I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die." "What did he say while he was attacking you?" "He said it would have been cleaner if I'd just taken the pills he'd been planning to give me. He said he was going to make it look like I fell and hit my head. He said that's what happens to people my age all the time." Sarah's voice broke. "He'd been planning it. Planning to kill me and make everyone think it was an accident." "How did you escape?" "Our dog Max. He must have heard the struggle. He came running and attacked Andrew, bit his arm. That gave me enough time to get away. I ran out of the house to the neighbors and they called 911. "Mrs. Richardson, do you believe Andrew Richardson intended to kill you that night?" "Yes, absolutely. If Max hadn't been there, I'd be dead." Frank Morrison's cross-examination was brief and careful. He knew Sarah was a sympathetic witness and he didn't want to alienate the jury by being too aggressive. "Mrs. Richardson, isn't it possible that your husband simply lost his temper during an argument? That he didn't actually intend to kill you just to silence you? He had his hands around my throat for what felt like forever. You don't do that to silence someone. You do that to kill them. But you can't know what was in his mind. I know what he wrote in his journal. I know about the insurance policy. I know about the fake suicide note. This wasn't a moment of anger. This was a plan he'd been working on for months." Morrison tried a few more questions but got nowhere. Sarah was unshakable. When she stepped down from the witness stand, she felt lighter than she had in months. She'd told her truth. She'd used her voice. And Andrew had sat there and heard every word, unable to silence her anymore. The defense's case was weak. Morrison tried to argue that while Andrew had committed fraud, the attempted murder charge was overblown. He called a psychologist who testified that Andrew showed signs of depression and financial stress, suggesting his crimes were born of desperation rather than malice. But on cross-examination, DA Linda Morrison destroyed that narrative. Dr. Patterson, does depression typically cause someone to create elaborate online personas to scam multiple women? Well, no, but does financial stress typically cause someone to forge insurance documents and write fake suicide notes? That's more complex. Does desperate behavior include planning a murder for months, documenting the planning in a journal, and researching how to stage a suicide? When you put it that way. I am putting it that way because that's what the evidence shows. This wasn't desperation. This was calculated, predatory behavior by someone who saw his wife as disposable. Morrison tried to call character witnesses, people who knew Andrew professionally and could speak to his good work over the years. But most of his former colleagues declined to testify. The few who did were quickly discredited when DA Morrison brought up Andrew's history of inappropriate relationships with clients and his forced departure from his firm. Andrew himself did not testify. His lawyer advised against it, knowing he'd be destroyed on cross-examination. Closing arguments came on May 2, 2022. DA Linda Morrison spoke for nearly 2 hours, methodically laying out every piece of evidence, every journal entry, every testimony. Andrew Richardson didn't just commit fraud, she told the jury. He committed a sustained campaign of psychological and financial abuse against his wife and dozens of other women. And when Sarah discovered the truth, he tried to murder her. Not in a moment of passion. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment crime. This was the culmination of months of planning. He researched methods. He increased her life insurance. He wrote a fake suicide note. And when the moment came, he put his hands around her throat and tried to squeeze the life out of her while telling her she was never enough. That's not assault. That's attempted murder. And it's not the only crime he should answer for. She detailed the fraud charges, the forgery, the conspiracy. Andrew Richardson destroyed lives. He stole nearly $500,000 from vulnerable women. He isolated and abused his wife for decades. And he tried to kill her to cover his tracks. The evidence is overwhelming. The guilt is clear. Find him guilty on all counts and send the message that this kind of evil will not be tolerated. Frank Morrison's closing was passionate but ultimately futile. Andrew Richardson made terrible choices. He hurt people, including his wife. But he's not the monster the prosecution wants you to see. He's a man who made mistakes, who committed crimes, yes, but who didn't set out to murder anyone. A moment of anger is not the same as premeditated murder. Consider the charges carefully. Consider what can actually be proven beyond reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated for 2 days. On May 4, 2022, they returned with their verdict. Sarah sat between Emily and Michael, holding both their hands as the foreman stood. In the matter of the state of Florida versus Andrew Richardson, on the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, how do you find? We find the defendant guilty. Sarah closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. On the charges of fraud, 42 counts, how do you find? Guilty on all counts. On the charges of forgery, conspiracy to commit murder, and aggravated assault, how do you find? Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in applause. Judge Patricia Alvarez gavelled for order. Andrew sat motionless, staring straight ahead. Sentencing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. During those weeks, victims submitted impact statements. Sarah wrote hers by hand, refusing to type it, wanting the words to be as personal as possible. For 38 years I believed I wasn't enough. Andrew told me so in 1,000 different ways until I believed it was true. He made me think I was lucky he stayed with me, that I should be grateful for the scraps of attention he gave me. He isolated me, controlled me, and when I finally found a source of happiness, even though that source was fake, even though he'd created it himself, he stole from me. He took the last of my mother's money, money that represented security and independence. And then he tried to take my life. But I survived. And in surviving, I learned that I was always enough. I was enough for my children who loved me. I was enough for my friends who stood by me. I was enough for myself. Andrew Richardson is the one who was never enough. Never enough of a man to be honest, never enough of a husband to be faithful, never enough of a human being to feel empathy. I hope he spends the rest of his life in prison, thinking about all the lives he destroyed, including his own. On May 25, 2022, Andrew Richardson stood before Judge Alvarez for sentencing. "Mr. Richardson," the judge began, her voice cold with contempt, "I have presided over this court for 18 years. I have seen many criminals. But I have rarely seen someone as calculating, as cruel, and as devoid of empathy as you. You didn't just commit fraud. You weaponized intimacy. You used your position as a husband to destroy the woman who trusted you most. You preyed on vulnerable women who were simply seeking connection and companionship. And when your wife discovered your crimes, you tried to murder her and make it look like suicide. The sentence for attempted murder in the first degree carries a maximum of 30 years. Combined with your fraud convictions, forgery, and conspiracy, you're facing potentially over 100 years in prison." Andrew's lawyer started to object, but the judge held up her hand. "I'm not finished. Mr. Richardson, you are 66 years old. Any sentence I give you today will likely be a life sentence. Some might argue that's excessive for a man your age. But I look at the evidence in this case and I see someone who showed no mercy, no compassion, no hesitation in destroying others for personal gain. Why should you receive mercy when you gave none?" She paused, looking at the papers before her. "For the attempted murder of Sarah Richardson, I sentence you to 30 years in state prison. For the 42 counts of fraud, I sentence you to an additional 40 years, to be served consecutively. For forgery and conspiracy, an additional 10 years. Total sentence, 80 years in prison without possibility of parole for at least 40 years. You will be 96 years old before you're eligible for parole. Mr. Richardson, you will spend the rest of your life paying for your crimes. May you use that time to reflect on the suffering you caused, though I doubt you have the capacity for such reflection." The gavel came down. Andrew was led away. For just a moment, as officers put their hands on his shoulders, he turned and looked at Sarah one last time. She looked back, unflinching. And she saw something in his eyes that almost looked like regret. Or maybe just the bitter recognition that he'd been caught, that his carefully constructed lies had finally collapsed. Then he was gone. Sarah walked out of the courthouse into the Florida sunshine, flanked by Emily and Michael. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but she didn't stop to answer. She had said everything she needed to say. The aftermath of the trial brought unexpected changes to Sarah's life. Several news outlets covered the story, and Sarah's experience resonated with people across the country. She received letters from other domestic abuse survivors, from people who'd been scammed online, from those who simply wanted to express their support. One letter came from a woman named Patricia, the same name as Sarah's late sister, who wrote, "I'm 72 years old and I just left my husband of 50 years after reading about your case. I always thought I was the problem. I always thought if I tried harder he'd love me. But your story made me realize that some people aren't capable of love, and staying with them doesn't make you loyal, it makes you a victim. Thank you for giving me the courage to leave." Sarah cried when she read that letter. If her pain could help even one person escape their own nightmare, then maybe something good had come from all of it. She was approached by a literary agent who suggested she write a book about her experience. At first, Sarah declined. The thought of reliving everything in such detail felt overwhelming. But Dr. Torres encouraged her to consider it. "Writing can be healing," the therapist said. "And your story could help so many people. Not just abuse survivors, but anyone who's ever felt they weren't enough. You're living proof that we can survive, that we can rebuild." So Sarah began writing. Slowly at first, just a few pages at a time. But gradually the words flowed. She wrote about her marriage, about the warning signs she'd missed, about the gradual erosion of her self-worth. She wrote about Patricia, about loneliness, about the vulnerability that scammers exploit. And she wrote about survival. About Max the golden retriever who saved her life. About Tom and Linda Henderson who opened their door. About Emily and Michael who surrounded her with love. About the slow, painful process of rebuilding an identity after decades of being told you're worthless. The book, titled Never Enough: How I Survived My Husband's Deadly Deception, was published in 2023. It became a New York Times bestseller. Sarah used the money from the book to establish a foundation, the Patricia Richardson Foundation for Abuse Survivors, named after her sister. The foundation provided resources for people leaving abusive relationships, funded counseling services, and offered education about financial abuse and online scams. She began speaking at events, sharing her story with audiences of survivors, advocates, and law enforcement. At first, public speaking terrified her. But each time she stood at a podium and told her truth, she felt stronger. One woman approached her after a talk in Georgia and said, My husband tells me I'm never enough. He says it all the time. But hearing you speak, I realize he's wrong. I'm going to leave him. Sarah hugged that woman and whispered, "You are enough. You always were." In 2024, 3 years after the attack, Sarah attended a support group meeting at a community center. The group had become her anchor, a place where she could be vulnerable and honest without judgment. That night, a new member joined, a woman named Helen, 68 years old, who had just left her husband after 42 years of marriage. "I don't know how to be alone," Helen said, crying. "I don't know who I am without him. He always said I was useless, that I couldn't do anything right. What if he was right?" Sarah reached across and took Helen's hand. "He wasn't right," she said firmly. "And I know that because I believed the same thing about myself for 38 years. My husband told me I was never enough and I believed him. But it was a lie. A lie designed to control me, to keep me from seeing my own worth. You are not useless. You are not nothing. You are a survivor. And we're going to help you discover who you really are." Around the circle, other women nodded, murmuring agreement. This, Sarah thought, was her purpose now. Not to be defined by what Andrew had done to her, but by how she'd survived it and how she could help others do the same. Max, the heroic golden retriever, lived another year after the attack. He passed away peacefully in his sleep in October 2022, at the age of 13. Sarah was devastated but also grateful. Max had saved her life and had spent his final year being pampered and celebrated as the hero he was. She scattered his ashes in a garden she'd planted at her apartment complex, among roses and lavender and all the flowers Max had loved to nap beside. "Thank you, buddy," she whispered as she released the ashes. "You gave me my life back. I'll never forget that." Emily and Michael remained close to Sarah, calling often, visiting regularly. The grandchildren, Emily's 2 kids and Michael's newborn daughter, brought light and joy into Sarah's life. "Mom seems different," Michael said to Emily during one visit. "Lighter. Happier." "She's finally free," Emily replied. "Free from Dad's control, free from believing she wasn't good enough. She's discovering who she is without someone telling her who to be." It was true. Sarah, at 63, was having experiences she'd never allowed herself before. She joined a book club and actually shared her opinions instead of staying quiet. She took a pottery class and made lopsided bowls that she loved precisely because they were imperfect. She went on a trip to Colorado with a group of women from her support group and hiked in the mountains, feeling strong and capable. She even, tentatively, started to think about dating again. Not seriously, not yet. But the idea that she could be loved, that she was worthy of partnership with someone who respected her, that idea no longer seemed impossible. One evening in spring 2024, Sarah sat on her balcony watching the sunset. Her plants were blooming, tomatoes and herbs and bright flowers that attracted butterflies. A watercolor she'd painted was drying on the easel beside her. A new book lay open in her lap. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Richardson, this is Margaret Dwyer. We met during the trial. I testified about being scammed by your ex-husband. I wanted to reach out and thank you. Seeing your courage helped me find my own. I've started a support group for scam victims in my area. We're helping each other heal. Thank you for showing us the way." Sarah smiled and typed back, "Thank you for reaching out. You are stronger than you know. Keep healing. Keep helping others. That's how we win." She set down the phone and looked out at the sky, painted in shades of orange and pink and gold. Andrew Richardson was in prison, where he'd spend the rest of his life. His cons had been exposed. His victims had found justice. And Sarah had found herself. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, sitting at a kitchen table, believing she was in love with a prince who didn't exist, unaware that her husband was planning to kill her. That woman had felt worthless, invisible, used up. But that woman had also been stronger than she knew. Strong enough to run when it mattered most. Strong enough to tell the truth even when it was terrifying. Strong enough to survive. Sarah had a scar on the back of her head from where Andrew had slammed her into the wall. She had nightmares sometimes, waking in a panic with phantom hands around her throat. The trauma didn't just disappear because justice had been served. But she also had a life now. A real life, built on her own terms, filled with people who valued her, work that mattered, moments of genuine joy. She'd spent 38 years being told she was never enough. Now finally she knew the truth. She had always been enough. She always would be. And that was worth surviving for. Take a moment and think about Sarah's journey. How many people do you think are in relationships right now with someone who makes them feel they're never enough? Have you or someone you know experienced this kind of manipulation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice could help someone else find the courage to leave. The story of Sarah Richardson became something larger than just one woman's escape from an abusive marriage. It became a catalyst for change. The Florida legislature passed the Sarah Richardson Act in 2025, strengthening penalties for financial elder abuse and requiring more oversight for online scams targeting seniors. The law also mandated training for law enforcement in recognizing coercive control and patterns of domestic abuse that don't leave visible bruises. Several dating and social networking sites updated their safety protocols after Sarah's case, implementing better verification systems and warning users about common romance scam tactics. And in Brookhaven, the retirement community where Sarah had lived, residents organized a neighborhood watch program specifically focused on checking in on isolated seniors, making sure no one else fell through the cracks the way Sarah almost had. Tom and Linda Henderson, the neighbors who'd called 911 that terrible night, became close friends with Sarah. They visited her in North Carolina, and Sarah credited them with helping save her life. "I just opened a door," Tom said modestly when Sarah thanked him publicly at one of her speaking events. "You opened a door when I needed it most," Sarah replied. "You didn't look away. You didn't tell yourself it wasn't your business. You helped. And that made all the difference." In 2026, Sarah was invited to speak at a national conference on domestic violence. Standing before an audience of hundreds of advocates, counselors, and survivors, she shared her story once again. But this time, she ended with a message she hadn't fully believed 5 years earlier. "Andrew Richardson told me I was never enough. He said it to break me, to keep me under his control. And for decades I believed him. But here's what I want every person in this room to understand. If someone in your life consistently makes you feel that you're not enough, not smart enough, not attractive enough, not interesting enough, not worthy enough, the problem isn't you. The problem is them. Healthy love doesn't diminish you. It doesn't require you to shrink yourself or silence your voice or doubt your worth. Healthy love builds you up. It celebrates you. It sees your value clearly. I wasted 38 years with someone who couldn't see my value. But I refuse to waste another day doubting it. I am enough. You are enough. We have always been enough." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Sarah stood at that podium, tears streaming down her face, and felt something she hadn't felt in decades: pride in herself. Not pride in what she'd endured, no one should have to endure what she had. But pride in what she'd become despite it. In the life she'd rebuilt. In the woman she'd discovered beneath all the lies Andrew had told her about herself. Andrew Richardson, meanwhile, sat in a Florida state prison. He'd aged rapidly in incarceration, now 69, with health problems brought on by stress and poor prison nutrition. He spent his days in a small cell, his nights plagued by insomnia. Other inmates knew what he'd done. Crimes against women, especially older women, weren't viewed favorably in prison. Andrew kept to himself, spoke to no one, participated in no programs. His children never visited. Emily and Michael had both written him letters after the sentencing, telling him they wanted nothing to do with him. That the man they'd thought was their father had never really existed. His only regular correspondent was his elderly mother, Diane, who at 92 was in failing health herself. She wrote him once a month, letters that Andrew read but never answered. "I don't understand what happened to you," she'd written in one. "I raised you better than this. I taught you to respect women, to be honest, to have integrity. Where did I go wrong?" Andrew had no answer for her. Or maybe he did but couldn't articulate it. He'd spent his entire life feeling inadequate, never quite successful enough, never quite respected enough, always comparing himself to other men and coming up short. So he'd compensated by making the women in his life feel even smaller. It had given him a sense of power, of superiority, that he craved. But in prison, stripped of all power, forced to confront the consequences of his actions, Andrew felt something he'd rarely experienced: shame. Not enough shame to change who he was fundamentally. He was too old, too set in his patterns. But enough to recognize, in his rare moments of honesty with himself, that he'd destroyed his own life as thoroughly as he'd tried to destroy Sarah's. The difference was Sarah had survived and rebuilt. Andrew had only ruins. In late 2026, Diane Richardson passed away at 93. Andrew was denied permission to attend her funeral. He sat in his cell that day, staring at the concrete wall, and realized he was now truly alone. No wife. No children. No mother. No friends. Just decades of prison ahead and a legacy of cruelty. Sarah heard about Diane's death through Emily and felt an unexpected surge of sadness. Not for Andrew but for Diane, who'd been a decent woman who somehow raised a monster. She sent flowers to the funeral with a card, "In memory of Diane who deserved better. Sarah." It was the last thought she'd spare for anyone with the Richardson name. By 2027, 6 years after the attack, Sarah had fully rebuilt her life. She'd published a second book, this one a guided journal for abuse survivors working through trauma. She'd expanded the Patricia Richardson Foundation to serve 5 states. She'd become a grandmother again, Michael's second child, a son named Patrick after Sarah's late sister. And one evening in June 2027, at a foundation fundraiser, Sarah met a man named David Chin. David was 70, a retired teacher who'd lost his wife to cancer 5 years earlier. He'd come to the fundraiser because his daughter worked for the foundation and had encouraged him to get out more, to stop isolating himself in grief. He and Sarah ended up sitting next to each other at dinner. They talked about books, about gardening, about the challenge of rebuilding life after loss. "I read your book," David admitted. "My daughter gave it to me. She said I needed to understand that other people had survived terrible things and found meaning again." "Did it help?" Sarah asked. "It gave me hope, and it made me angry on your behalf. No one should have to endure what you did." "No, they shouldn't. But I did endure it. And I'm still here." David smiled. "You're definitely still here." They exchanged phone numbers. David called the next week and asked if Sarah would like to get coffee. Just as friends, he clarified. He wasn't ready for anything more than friendship, and he sensed she probably wasn't either. "Friendship sounds perfect," Sarah said. They became friends. Real friends with no agenda, no manipulation, no hidden motives. They met for coffee once a week, went to bookstores together, attended lectures at the local college. David listened when Sarah talked about her trauma. He never minimized it, never told her to get over it, never suggested she should be past it by now. And Sarah listened when David talked about his wife, about the grief that still ambushed him at unexpected moments. She didn't tell him how to feel or try to fix his pain. She just listened. "You're easy to talk to," David said one afternoon as they walked through a botanical garden. "So are you," Sarah replied. "I think," David paused, seeming to gather courage. "I think I'd like to try moving beyond friendship. If you're interested, no pressure. I just wanted to be honest about my feelings." Sarah's immediate instinct was to say no. She'd promised herself she didn't need romantic love, that she was complete on her own. But then she looked at David, kind, patient, genuine David, and realized that saying no out of fear was just another way of letting Andrew control her life. "I'd like that too," she said. Slowly, carefully. "But yes." They dated for a year, taking things at a pace that felt safe for both of them. David met Emily and Michael, who thoroughly vetted him and gave their cautious approval. Sarah met David's daughter and grandchildren, who welcomed her warmly. And in the summer of 2028, on a quiet afternoon in Sarah's garden, David asked her to marry him. "I don't need to marry you to love you," he said. "We can just continue as we are. But I'd like to make a formal promise, that I'll honor you, respect you, support you, and never make you feel like you're anything less than extraordinary. Because you are extraordinary, Sarah." Sarah cried. Happy tears this time. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." They had a small ceremony in September 2028, surrounded by family and close friends. Sarah was 67. David was 71. Neither of them had thought they'd get another chance at love, at partnership built on mutual respect. Sarah wore a simple blue dress. David wore a suit. They wrote their own vows. "I promise to never make you doubt your worth," David said. "I promise to celebrate who you are, not try to change you. I promise that when I say you're enough, I'll mean it, because you are more than enough. You're everything." Sarah's vows were equally heartfelt. "I promise to trust you even though trust is hard for me now. I promise to communicate honestly even when it's scary. I promise to build a partnership with you, not a hierarchy. And I promise to remember every day how lucky I am to have found real love after believing it didn't exist." As they kissed, sealing their marriage, Sarah felt something she'd never felt with Andrew: peace. This was what love was supposed to feel like. Safe, joyful, equal. She'd spent 38 years in a marriage that diminished her. Now she was in one that celebrated her. And that made all the difference. Andrew Richardson learned about Sarah's remarriage through a newspaper article that somehow made its way to the prison. An inmate who knew his story left it on his bunk with a note: "Your ex-wife moved on. Have you?" Andrew read the article, a brief mention in the society section about Sarah Richardson and her work with the Domestic Abuse Foundation, noting that she'd recently married. He felt a surge of anger. How dare she move on? How dare she be happy while he rotted in prison? But beneath the anger was something else. Something that almost felt like loss. Sarah had been his. For 38 years she'd been his to control, to manipulate, to diminish. And now she wasn't. She belonged to herself, and to someone else who actually valued her. Andrew had lost her. And in losing her, he'd lost the last bit of power he'd ever have over anyone. He crumpled the article and threw it away. But that night, alone in his cell, Andrew Richardson, for perhaps the first time in his life, allowed himself to acknowledge the truth. He had destroyed everything good he'd ever had. Not because of bad luck or circumstances beyond his control, but because of his own cruelty, his own inability to see other people as anything more than tools for his benefit. Sarah had been a good wife. She'd loved him, supported him, raised his children, stood by him through career setbacks and personal failures. And he'd repaid that devotion by systematically destroying her spirit and attempting to end her life. He was the monster everyone said he was. And there was no redemption coming. No change of heart that would undo the damage. No appeal that would free him. Just decades more of this cell, this isolation, this recognition that he'd thrown away everything for nothing. Andrew Richardson closed his eyes and, for the first time since childhood, cried. But no one heard. No one cared. He was alone. Completely and utterly alone. And it was exactly what he deserved. Andrew Richardson later died in prison. He died alone. His body was claimed by the state and cremated. No funeral was held. Emily and Michael were notified of their father's death. Neither attended any service. Neither mourned. He stopped being our father a long time ago, Michael said. Maybe he never was. Sarah, when she heard the news, felt nothing. Not relief. Not anger. Not sadness. Just a quiet acknowledgement that a chapter had finally, definitively closed. I hope he found peace, she said to David that evening. Do you really? David asked. Sarah considered. I hope he found awareness. Understanding of what he'd done. If that brought peace, then yes. If it brought torment, then that's what he chose for himself. And that was the last time she spoke of Andrew Richardson. Her life, her beautiful reconstructed life, was too full of love and purpose to waste another moment on the man who tried to take it from her. This is where we leave Sarah's story, though her legacy continues through the foundation, through the thousands of lives touched by her courage, through the book that still helps abuse survivors find their voice. Her message endures. You are enough. You have always been enough. And if someone in your life tells you otherwise, the problem is them, not you. Before we end, we want to hear from you. Sarah's story is a testament to survival, to rebuilding, to refusing to let someone else define your worth. If this story has impacted you, please leave a comment sharing your thoughts. And if you or someone you know is in a relationship where you're constantly being told you're not enough, please reach out for help. You deserve better. You deserve love that builds you up, not tears you down. Hit that subscribe button to stay informed about more stories that expose the darkness but also celebrate the strength of survivors. Thank you for watching. May we all learn from Sarah's courage, and may we all remember, you are enough. You always were. You always will be.